Okay. Yeah, my name's Bruce Davis. Some of you may have met me before. I think I spoke here a few years ago. I am currently retail director of a new FSA-regulated investment company, and prior to that, I've been involved in things like I was one of the founders of Zopa, and over the last sort of 12 years, I've spent time as basically an anthropologist studying money, and I'd like to talk about innovating finance, because what I find is that when you think about innovating finance, we think about usually one of two things. We think about the technology side of things, and we think about the financial side of things. Okay, so how can we get new technologies for people to do stuff in cool ways with their money? And I think the experience of working on something like Zopa was really, actually, there's a sort of third thing you need to think about, and that's basically the social, the cultural. And actually, money isn't financial. Money's not financial. Money is social, it's cultural, it's what we make it. And one of the things I try to evangelise a little bit as someone that wants to create new things to do with money is to get more people to realise that this sort of simple fact, this sort of liberating thought, if you like, a bit of a change of philosophy. So I spent an awful long time talking to people at the reasonably senior levels inside banks, I guess, and trying to convince them that there's a kind of a different view of money out there, and largely being told to bugger off, because that different view of money didn't really include them. It sort of talked about the money that's out there, the money that's in people's, it's in their bank accounts, yes, but it's in their everyday lives, and actually that banks and very big financial institutions, however important they might seem on the news, actually take up a very small percentage of people's lives and mind. We don't think about them very much, actually. And so these incredibly, what they thought, important financial institutions turn out to be really tiny bits of our brain. And most of what we think about when it comes to money is the stuff we do with it. So the more that you got yourself in tune with the way we do things with money, the less you'd need these big, hefty financial institutions to try and convince you to do something other than was really in tune with what you wanted to do. So Zopa was the first kind of start of that. And Zopa was really a massive social experiment, if I'm honest. I don't think we really knew that Zopa was going to work. In fact, everyone said it wouldn't. Any economist who looked at Zopa said, no way. It doesn't conform to any of the models I work to. A lot of bankers said it wouldn't work for the same reason, because it didn't look like a bank. And really, you know, what was at the heart of what Zopa was about was a sort of a basic insight that you can get people to trust one another and to deal with one another without the need for an intermediary getting in the way. At eBay, we sort of started the pitch with Zopa as eBay for money. eBay was the best model out there for proving that you could do that. And I think even now, people still look at something like eBay and say it's not terribly efficient, and it's all very social and fluffy, and if only people could act like rational, perfect markets, everything would be better. In fact, the most recent Nobel Prize was for the guy that came up with the perfect market. You know, just obviously got proven that they don't exist. So, that's a sort of example of the sort of state of denial that we have around financial services, and also it's kind of a myth that it kind of keeps people feeling like they're in power and that they're in control over things. So, abundance is the next step. I guess, in many respects, abundance is some of the things that I wanted to do after Zopa. Now I'm trying to make that happen. So what abundance allows you to do is regular capital return by investing directly into a renewable energy project somewhere in the UK. So our investors are individuals, and they're retail investors. It's a minimum of £5, and they can go online. They can look at some projects. It could be a wind project or a solar project. It could be a wind farm in Scotland. It could be a solar project down in Cornwall. It could be anaerobic digestion in Wales. It doesn't really matter what that project is. They can look at that prospectus. They can see the information, make a decision for themselves to put their money into that project. They put that money in for the lifetime of the project, which is about 20 years, and over that time they get a return based on the amount of energy that project generates, and therefore the cash that it generates, the share of revenue. So it took a long time to sort of get to that point. So we started out with a very simple goal: how do we connect people up with these more interesting assets that aren't cash and aren't equities and aren't basically sort of playing the tune of the banks? and realised actually that's a hell of a lot more complicated than it sounds. Because actually you then start getting into the world of cooperatives and quite small-scale little initiatives, and the problem with them is they're quite expensive to set up and they're relatively small scale because of financial regulation. So then we realised that actually we have to be regulated. And we realised that, we then opened up a whole world of pain called the FSA, which is good at one level. It's scrutiny. It does make you look at yourself. It does make you look at your processes. They do have some set things they are checking. At the other level, they're not really set up to deal with new stuff, and they'll probably admit that. New stuff for them is a worry, it's a risk. And at the time we were going through the FSA, the financial system was collapsing. So the FSA was pretty nervous about anything new. It took 12 months to convince the FSA that what we were doing was not systemic risk, but what we were doing was allowing people to invest in something that they could understand, and to really sort of show that that was possible. And it was interesting to see how much they really did believe that you needed banks, you needed these institutions, you needed funds, you needed intermediation. Otherwise people would somehow make a mistake, despite the fact at that particular moment the people making the mistake were the banks, the institutions and the intermediaries, and people were just looking at it and going, well, what the hell just happened? So it's kind of, that's really what we're trying to do in Abundance at sort of one or two levels. One is to sort of, is to shake this belief in there is a system, okay? Because there isn't a system. There's just a series of beliefs about the world. They just happen to be big and in big buildings in Canary Wharf. But it doesn't give them any more right over how our money is managed to someone who's small and may well not actually have a big building and might just be online. And we kind of need to get around this as a society, because otherwise we'll keep going back to these institutions and we'll keep giving them our money, which we're currently doing at the moment. We're all socially investing at the moment, propping them up for no return, which I think is very altruistic of us. But fundamentally, we could go out there and get a better return if ever we were allowed to. Now, what tends to happen then is a financial institution says, oh no, you can't do that because people aren't educated about finance and don't know how to invest. That's pretty much their view. They get confused. And then when you look at, well, what are the roots of that confusion, it's the fact that financial institutions make it incredibly complicated to invest in stuff. It's actually quite simple. We use a debenture. Debentures have been around since 1600. They were a way for companies to bring debt and the same way they saw governments were doing it with bonds, companies had debentures. Now, at the moment, before Abundance came along, the only way you could buy a debenture was if you wanted to support Arsenal or if you wanted to watch Wimbledon. And they've kind of been forgotten about. But we said, well, these are great, because what we can do here is we can offer people a long-term investment, i.e. it pays over the long term. And secondly, we can give them a bit more connection to the thing they're investing in, because they choose to buy something in a particular project, and they can buy debentures in more than one project, it doesn't matter to us. And they get a return that's sort of equity-like, so it's a return that's variable. And the variability is you get a share of the revenue produced. Now that's a bit like having a buy-to-let property, which of course is unregulated, you can do that if you want. And but it's unlike putting money in savings, where of course you take the return you're given, or shares where the return is complicated by the fact you've got volatility in the price of the underlying asset. So what we're trying to find here is these are things like wind farms. They tend to work for about 25 years, they have a lot of upfront costs, they need finance, they also need to engage their communities, and we're really looking for a way to do that at a scale, okay? Because we're actually 200 billion short of the amount of money we need to build a renewable energy infrastructure that we need not to be entirely dependent on, say, Russian gas. So, and it's interesting how when you spent the day actually over the Department of Energy and Climate Change, they're almost in denial about that number. I mean, they think that this money will sort of appear at some point in the future. I'm not entirely sure where, but they're not necessarily engaged in, well, how do we build that up? Because actually we have that sort of available assets in savings and so on in this country, and we could invest it in the biggest resource that we actually own, which is the wind and the sea and the sun. Surprisingly, we have quite a lot of sun. But we don't do that, which for me is a bit like Saudi Arabia saying, let's just leave the oil in the ground, because it's not going to be worth the hassle. So, just a few things. What we're trying to do then as Abundance is create kind of a positive circle. So, this was sort of something we drew when we founded Abundance. It was a conversation in the British Library, which is you've gone to the British Library, you know they have those posters up about come up with a great idea in the business centre. We weren't in the business centre, we were in the cafe. But, and we actually basically drew this. So there was a problem. We've got ordinary people have a positive reason to support renewable energy companies. So at that point we're relatively evil in people's minds because they go and build wind farms in places and everyone thought it didn't work. Encouraging them to build renewable energy farms which earns money back for people. Now, when we started, the only way you could really do that was through schemes with a minimum really of about £20,000 to invest. So VCTs, EIS schemes, those sorts of things. This asset was not available to an ordinary person. And it wasn't available not for any reason of risk or anything else, it's just that essentially the city's quite lazy and it prefers a small number of very rich investors to a large number of not very rich investors. Because a large number of not very rich investors requires managing and infrastructure and cost, and the internet obviously hasn't happened in the city. So it's very much built around this model that the best way to raise money is to get a lot of rich people to do exactly what they've always done. You just take all the best stuff and then leave us with the dregs and the bill quite often as well. So what we're trying to do here is say, look, if you start from ordinary people, how can we allow someone to invest in this for £5 and make it work so that they feel in control of that process and that they are feeling part of the solution rather than having the solution done to them. And it's particularly relevant if you're talking to the rural communities that are around some of these farms where incomes are not great and they don't have lots of money to invest, but they do want to feel that they are part of what's going on. So we're basically sort of talking about a building society for the 21st century. That's kind of our ethos, if you like. Because building societies were a response to a problem, they were a response to banks not lending to build houses because they were too small a little projects and you needed local companies that had local knowledge and local credit and could form local relationships. And we're pretty much doing the same thing, but through the internet we can also bring in that national angle as well. We're not a building society, we're not run for the benefit of our members, we're a limited company, but our investors, they get a return direct to them and they take the majority of the spread. So it's really there. What we're trying to solve there is, well, how do we then kind of make people feel that they can do this? It's one of our barriers to our innovation is actually socially, we're still not very confident with our money. We sort of want to venture out, we want to do it, but then people kind of regress back and think, well, I'll leave it in that big, horrible bank that I hate, but I'm still going to use it. So I'm just going to, I'll just show an example of one of the ways we're trying to make it real for people, because I think this is just, I think the most innovative thing, or the thing we spent the longest trying to solve, is how do I present that to you when I know that you're not feeling very confident about doing this and it feels a bit scary and I might be the first person to do it. So the first thing we do is get you to answer a question that you know the answer to, which is how much do you spend on energy? And that turns on a load of stuff. That's our little guy down there. So, okay, I've got an electricity bill of about £1,200 per year. The average electricity bill in this country is about £500. And I can then have a look at how much I would need to invest in either a wind farm, or I can have a look there's my little solar world, and I can just I can invest right £1,000. I can invest more. As I invest more, I turn on a bit more, or I can think actually no, I want to see how many wind farms I just turned on. So what we're doing there is giving people an idea of the more you invest, the more you share you buy of something and the more return you get, and you can start to see how that might be, and whether for the average person's bill, I think you need to invest about £7,000 or £8,000 and you're essentially earning in cash the same as you're spending in cash on electricity. So for someone who may be thinking about putting solar panels on their roof, worried about the hassle and actually just missed the boot because they dropped the thing in tariff, they can have a look at this and say, right, okay, if I invest about £7,000 or £8,000, which is slightly less than they would have spent on buying solar panels, then they can get a return which sort of matches their energy bill. Now, they can take that as a cash return, which goes into their bank account and do what they like with it. They can actually have that paid direct to their energy bill if they want. One of the other things we decided was, wouldn't it be great if people actually got used to the idea of investing to pay for something they know they're going to use in the future, whose return has a limited correlation to the price of that thing in the future. So if you're invested in wind, then you are exposed to the energy market. You are selling that wind at sort of wholesale minus energy price if it's intermittent. So when the energy price rises, what you get from your wind energy rises. So your return will rise. And also will fall, obviously, because of that. So the idea there is to start getting people used to the idea that your money can be put to productive use. In very simple terms, kind of thinking, well, how do we shift people from thinking about money is only really about what you can get? It's quite short term. It's about credit. It's about taking on debt to get something now. So money being about what you can do and how you can earn a return over time. At the end of the time, you get your money back. This is just a loan you give to this company. It either comes back as a payment over the period of the debenture, or it comes back as a lump sum at the end. Fundamentally, what you're doing here is doing something with your money. It's productive money, and you start to understand how you can do things with your money. And we're then seeing that might be extended a bit further. So abundance is starting with renewable energy to set the example. We can also look at social impact bonds through this model, where again, your money is doing something useful in your community. But we also think there's a sort of broader effect there, which is the same effect we're looking for from the renewable energy. So if you're invested in renewable energy and you start to think about your return related to what you spend, well, it's not a leap to then start to reduce what you're spending on energy. Think about what you are spending on energy a bit more proactively, because you've got something in your mind that says, I'm earning against that. And likewise, in social impact, if you've got the whole community invested in the social impact you're trying to create, i.e. they've got a vested interest, as well as getting the benefit and getting the return, they're actually also involved in that, which is what Simon was talking about. You feel part of the solution. And some of the work I've been doing up with what they're now called troubled families, they were problem families, they're now troubled. We will be when. Anyway, is that those families, by definition, are isolated and singled out. And when you do that, you create more issues than you had when you started. So our whole social care system is built on containing these people and keeping them out of society. Whereas, actually, if you let them into society again and actually make them feel part of it, then you would help 50% of the problem they actually face. And the community would then, once again, feel responsible for it. So let's just really say, well, money's fundamentally a social thing. And if you start thinking about money as a social thing, you're freed up a little bit from the myths that we create around money to make us put it in banks.
Questions? Oh, hold on.
Two questions. One is, if I read the slide, it seems to say you're taking 1.7% annually.
Yes.
We've got a load of PR going up the agenda around the city is ripping people off because they're taking about 1.5% annually. Is 1.7% kind of credible?
Well,
that's question one.
Yeah.
Question two is, can you put it in a SIP?
Yes, question two is yes, you can put it in a SIP. That's where we started on our fees. So we looked at our fees very hard and how we charge. So what we do for that is set up an online bank account. So the things that you do for it. So I think, yes, there are charges when it's essentially, you've got, say, a pension fund that is, or a managed fund, getting access to that. Within our model, you're doing a little bit more than that. So our charges are about covering the fact you want to deposit money with us, you make that decision, we support all that infrastructure. So that's...
So basically, you think it will make sense that people will be able to see what you're spending the money on?
Yeah, that you're getting that as part of that complete service, and as that service scales, we reduce those charges. The other side, I think, is that within that charge is 1.7 on top of what you earn, and we're looking at the region of between 4 and 7% variable in terms of what we're going to offer our customers. So this, at the moment, we're not launched yet, we're launched in January, and depending on the product, the type of renewable energy you're invested in that you choose, those are sort of range of returns. So our fees on top of that doesn't come out of that return.
Are you finding a challenge to try and persuade people to be more social with their money, or are you targeting people that are already interested in being social with their money?
Well, I guess our early adopters would be someone that has looked at Zopa and doesn't think it's a completely crazy idea. What we found is that being social with your money is not necessarily about peer-to-peer. Being social with your money is being in tune with the way I use money in everyday life. So we find that some of our early adopters are actually what I call domestic entrepreneurs. These are actually people who started out trying to target in Zopa. They're people who make investments where they like to invest in stuff that's tangible. So they're driving the buy-to-let market at the moment. They're driving the home improvement market, to be honest, because their money needs to do something, so they feel the need to put it into something solid. They look at this and they see solid in the sense that it's a thing. I can go and visit it if I want to. So yeah, it is. Our early adopters tend to be more green-minded and tend to be more open to the idea of an alternative finance proposition, but it goes more into the mainstream research.
Talking about the tangibility and solidity of it, have you considered using this as a vehicle to allow people to offset their carbon usage? Instead of giving them a cash return, they'll be paying them carbon credits, and they can use that to neutralise their carbon footprint.
Yeah, we sort of started out with that idea, actually. We were going to have a currency of energy, and that was about avoiding all regulation completely. In the future, I imagine that's where it might end up. Okay, that we'll have different currencies and different ways of taking your return. We decided the simplest way to deal with renewable energy is actually to realise that you join up the pounds rather than the electrons. If I don't know if you saw Brian Cox trying to explain physics to celebrities last night, but basically trying to explain physics to everybody in this country is just too much. When someone's telling me that they're worried about joining Scottish Power, it's an awful long way to truck the electricity. I know I'm pushing water uphill. We haven't bothered to try and understand this stuff that we have in our wires, and we don't know how it gets there. This is the first step. So there's a whole job around energy itself and education there. But the main thing is they don't believe these things make money. And trust me, cities have been making a lot of money out of renewable energy over the last 10 years, and it just hasn't bothered to let it out for everybody to participate.
Okay, I think we're all done. Thanks very much.